This is absolutely bizarre to me that you can't talk about justification anymore in these denominations. You can decide exactly how the United States should fall out on any number of public policy issues that have absolutely not a shred of exegetical support underneath it.
And it's left and it's right.
Yeah. It's nutty is what it is. On this edition of the White Horse Inn, a discussion of political temptations. White Horse Inn. Know what you believe and why you believe it.
5 centuries ago, in taverns and public houses across Europe, the masses would gather for discussion and debate over the latest ideas sweeping the land. From one such meeting place, a small Cambridge inn called the White Horse, the Reformation came to the English-speaking world. Carrying on the tradition of the early reformers, welcome to the White Horse Inn.
Hello and welcome to another broadcast of the White Horse Inn with Kim Riddlebarger, Rod Rosenblatt, Ken Jones, and I'm Mike Horton. We're talking in this broadcast about political temptations. It's part of that distraction from Christ and Him crucified. Looking away from Jesus Christ has been a perennial temptation throughout church history. The Pharisees were so distracted by their campaign to reestablish the Old Covenant theocracy that they missed the Messiah when He actually appeared. Most of those who were crying, Hosanna to the Son of David in regal celebration as Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, were crying, Crucify Him on Good Friday. For those looking for nothing more than national commitment to biblical morality and driving out the Romans, Jesus was certainly a great disappointment. Ironically, on the road to Emmaus, soon after His resurrection, Jesus caught up with 2 of His disciples who were still deeply disillusioned. We thought He was the one who would redeem Israel, they said, not realizing that He just had redeemed Israel on a much grander scale than they had room for in their limited horizon of expectation. Looking away from Christ has been easy for Christians, too, especially when the supposedly Christian emperor fancies himself Christ in absentia. Before long, popes were also Christ's visible substitutes. The whole of Europe was simply Christendom, the Holy Roman Empire, complete with its crusading knights who assumed the role of David's warriors defending the city of God. Today, there are many Christians who still pine for a supposedly Christian America as the latest incarnation of Christ. And since 2008 is an election year, many churches will have even more opportunity to be distracted. But Christ only had one incarnation. It was over 2,000 years ago in Palestine, born in a barn with humble earthly witnesses rather than in a palace attended by a royal staff. Jesus was born to live a life of perfect love and holiness for us, to bear our sentence on the cross, and to be raised the 3rd day for our justification. It's easy to miss this Jesus if we're not careful, just because we were looking for something more spectacular. How does our obsession with turning America into Zion contribute to Christless Christianity? What do we mean when we talk about the doctrine of the 2 kingdoms? What happens when we confuse them? And how did we come to confuse them so obviously in a land so committed to the separation of church and state? Does our faith have anything to do with parties, candidates, and platforms? Political distractions, that's our subject on this edition of the White Horse Inn as we wind up our introduction to the theme for 2008, Challenging Christless Christianity. First of all, guys, are we confusing Christ and His kingdom with America today? That's a softball.
That's the great temptation of the age, yes.
Yeah, I think probably along with the confusion of law and gospel, the confusion of the 2 kingdoms are probably the 2 greatest hurdles and problems in the contemporary church.
Agreed.
Remember back in 2001, after the September 11th terrorist attacks, in the National Cathedral service in Washington, there was a parade of the honor guard of the armed forces to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And then President Bush declared that it was his cause or the cause of the United States to rid the world of evil. A senator announced that the events of 9/11 have reinforced the view that America is a sacred nation. Billy Graham said that this is going to produce a revival. it certainly did produce a revival, a new wave of nationalism that at least lasted for a while. On the other hand, precisely because of its sacred covenant, according to Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, the horrible tragedy was God's judgment on his nation for tolerating abortion and homosexuality.
Yeah.
More recently, in a book titled God's Judgments, Interpreting History and the Christian Faith, published by InterVarsity Press, another evangelical, Stephen Kaler, explains why he thinks that 9/11 was God's judgment for America's greed, free trade policies, and militarism. So everyone seems to think that America has this most favored nation status, and that his blessings can be directly correlated to America doing the right thing, and dangers being the result of America's broken covenant with God. How did all this happen? How did we get
By the
here?
way, let's not forget the worship service that was held in the immediate aftermath of
At Yankee Stadium.
no, at the National Cathedral.
That's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah.
Even a name like National Cathedrals and
I was
Confusion of
just gonna
Kingdoms.
say, I was going to say, the very title of the
Yep.
building indicates the two kingdoms are thoroughly confused.
Yeah.
There should be the Anglican Cathedral in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
period.
Right. Tell me what you think of this, if this is right. It seems like we went from the stage, first of all, of allegorizing the story of Israel into the story of European civilization with Christendom.
Yes. Yes.
And then did that with the rise of nation states, with the breakup of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither Holy Roman or an empire. The breakup of Christendom, you had the rise of Christian nations. And those nation states claimed a favored status, despite the fact that the Reformation and the confessions of Reformed and Lutheran traditions said that the old covenant and the theocracy were now obsolete. You still had Protestant kings and rulers and prime ministers claiming that their nation was in covenant with God. So when, for instance, Britain met the Spanish Armada and defeated it, though it seemed as if the Spanish had the upper hand, of course it was attributed to God as Christ was trampling the serpent, Rome, the Roman Antichrist. This confusion of national successes and failures with biblical prophecy has been going on for a long time, but now we've moved from allegorizing that story, which means no longer interpreting it in its historical context, but stepping into it as if it's clothes that we could just put on ourselves.
Yeah.
We've gone from allegorizing it to secularizing it. So now manifest destiny, just some vague sense that America has a mission in the world, is a secularized version of this global spreading of the kingdom of God through national expansion.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things packed in there. One is probably the loss of a doctrine of providence. It would seem to me many evangelicals confuse providence and redemption. So while you could make a case that the United States has served a very important role in God's providence in restraining evil such as Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan and things like that, where we have been used as God's agent to basically pound the beast when it's appeared a couple of times. We confuse that with redemption, that somehow our cause is righteous because God has used us providentially. I think we've got to keep those two things very, very, very distinct.
Especially when God, in the Scriptures, used
Assyria and
Assyria,
Babylon.
providentially.
And that's how we have to view the United States, as occupying that kind of a role as a great nation that God uses to keep other nations in check, and that means that our nation is one of those nations that's equally sinful and equally fallen.
Yeah.
So we have to take redemption out of the equation when it comes to the United States. I also think we have to make the case, or at least look at the point, that there's no doubt that the United States has supported more missionaries and sent more money to. I mean, a lot of the prosperity that God has given us providentially has been used by Christians for very worthwhile and good things. So if you keep that distinct from redemption, look at it in terms of providence, then I think you can say that the United States has been used mightily of God, if you're talking about those kinds of things. If you don't have a distinction between redemption and providence, then it becomes America is a Christian nation kicking out the Amalekites.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's what you can't say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, that's so clearly stated, Kim. and that's what's missing. People won't. They will immediately go to, like you mentioned,